In 1944, the architect of quantum theory, Max Planck, he made a statement that reverberated throughout the scientific community like a shockwave of a huge earthquake. While he was speaking at a conference in Florence, Italy, Planck stated, "There is no matter as such. All matter," he said, "originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and an intelligent mind. This mind," he said, "is the matrix of all matter." Well, now we know Planck was right. There is a field of energy. It's universal, it's everywhere all of the time, and it influences everything that happens in the world around us, as well as the world within us. But the new evidence now goes beyond simply telling us that this matrix exists. The experiments are revealing the rules that govern Planck's matrix, also now known as the divine matrix, and how we can apply those rules in our lives, and that is what this series is all about. My name's Gregg Braden, and I'd like to welcome you to the divine matrix, bridging time, space, miracles, and belief. I am your host for this entire series, and I am absolutely thrilled to bring you the discoveries as well as the controversy surrounding these discoveries. So let's begin with the beginning. Just what is the divine matrix? Sometimes the best way to describe a discovery and what it means is through a real-life example from the real world. Between 1978 and 1995, a small group of scientists working in a makeshift lab tucked away on a U.S. military base, they accomplished something that was believed to be impossible at the time. From their small, leaky laboratory at Fort Meade, Maryland, using simple techniques, the researchers were exploring a sophisticated and a mysterious new frontier. But their frontier wasn't located at the edges of the galaxy or hidden deep inside the quantum atom. The realm they were exploring was an inner frontier, an advanced state of consciousness that had a Star Trek-like potential for gathering information during the Cold War years. If someone had casually walked into the room while one of his experiments was happening, they could have easily mistaken what they saw for a lunchtime relaxation class. But in truth, nothing could have been further from the truth. The researchers, they were sitting quietly, their eyes closed, were learning to access and sustain a mysterious state of consciousness that you and I typically pass through every night as we drift into a deep sleep. The bottom line is that they were trying to achieve three things. First thing they were trying to do was, on demand, access a state of consciousness without slipping into a deeper sleep. Number two, once they were in this state, they wanted to stay there. They wanted to stay suspended, conscious, and actively awake and able to function from this place. And number three, they wanted to discover how the state of consciousness can actually be a conduit to other locations in the physical world, remote locations that they could actually see and hear and smell and even touch without ever leaving a laboratory. Well, the technique they were exploring is called remote viewing, and the name given to the project at the time that tells the whole story. It was called Project Stargate, and it was a military attempt to explore the deepest realms of human potential for military applications during the Cold War years. The idea was simply this, that valuable and potentially life-saving information could be gathered from the field around us without risking the lives of men and women with boots physically on the ground going to these remote locations. The key here is that the projects at Fort Meade and remote viewing sessions in general, these things can only be possible because the matrix exists. It provides something for the consciousness of the viewer to travel through. Well, Project Stargate officially ended in 1995, and it's recently been declassified, so we now have access to the results that were produced during those early sessions at Fort Meade. And I'd like to use some of those results, as well as others, to give you just an example of how real this matrix is and how deeply it underlies our physical reality. In a typical remote viewing session, there are two people that are involved. One is the viewer, and this is the one whose consciousness is actually traveling. And the second is called the monitor. And the role of the monitor is simple. The role of the monitor is to guide the viewer into a specific state of consciousness, and then to help the viewer stay in that state using predetermined protocols, and to communicate from that state without dropping into a deeper sleep. The monitor guides the viewer step by step to help them focus on things like a precise location or an object that can be either in another room, it could be another city, or it can be on a battlefield on the other side of the planet. Here's an example of what I mean. The viewers are typically given a target of some kind. It can be a building, it can be a location, it can be a geographic area, it can be a person. They are given physical coordinates. It can be a street address, it can be a latitude and a longitude. And the viewers receive subtle sensations while they're in this altered state. And one of the things that the researchers found during these early experiments is that the sensations are not the most present, the most visible, the brightest, the most profound, but often the very, very subtle sensations. And they have to be trained to recognize and be able to detect these very subtle sensations. And they begin to sketch on a piece of paper what it is that they see, as well as other sensations of smell, or if they feel touch, or they hear specific sounds. The image that you're seeing on the screen is an example from one of these early sessions. The viewer was given coordinates, latitude and longitude, of a place somewhere on the Earth. They had no idea where this place was. And from the altered state, the viewer began to sketch what you're seeing. And what you're seeing in the upper right-hand corner is a body of water. The viewer felt that this was an ocean, and that was noted. You're seeing the longitudinal runway or highway that was drawn. That's very obvious in the center of the image. And then just to the left and to the upper left, they saw what they perceived as some kind of buildings that were there. So the viewer is sketching only what he or she perceives in this subtle state without imposing their ideas and their viewpoints, their filters of what should or should not be. And this is what takes the training. Well, the next image that you're seeing on the screen is an actual photograph of the location that the viewer picked up in the remote sensing session. This is a military target, and what you see in the photograph is there's an ocean in the upper part of the image. There is actually a runway, and so the viewer was right on this target. There's a runway that is running through the center of the image, and to the left, we begin seeing the structures and the buildings. So what happens in these sessions is sometimes a remote viewer can pick up things that may not be visible in the photographs, and sometimes the photographs have things that may not be visible to the remote viewer. When we put these together, they give us the opportunity to gather information without ever having a person physically go to gather that information. Let me give you another example, and I find this one really fascinating because of the specificity here. The remote viewer was given a location, and in that location, the viewer began to detect very, very clearly a structure, and you're seeing that structure on the screen. Didn't know what the structure was, but the wheels were very obvious, and the form of the structure was very obvious, and the viewer was trained to record without projecting his or her impressions. In this case, it was a male. What it is that they saw. Well, the next image that you're seeing on the screen is what was actually there. This is an industrial crane, and you can see, look at the similarities. There are two wheels at each corner, and the viewer got that right on. Look at the structure and the way that this is moving along a track. The photographs now show us that this was an industrial crane from a military industrial complex, a very specific crane used only to move very specific kinds of material. So this gives the analyst, the military analyst, insight into what's happening at this location in ways that they could only have if someone were physically there watching this. So I'm sharing these two images for a purpose. The images begin as general descriptions, and the specifics can then be identified and honed into. So for example, on the crane, the researchers could have asked for the viewer to spend more time and more detail and go deeper into what that crane was all about and how it was being used. So, at its peak, The original remote viewing project, it employed 22 people, cost about $20 million, and it was used on more than 450 missions. The project was so successful, it located American hostages in Iran. It successfully pinpointed Scud missiles during the Gulf War without ever sending men and women into the desert, risking their lives physically to find those missiles. It even located the plutonium in North Korea in 1994 when there was a question as to where North Korea was in their nuclear program. The success of the remote viewing experiments poses a key question, and the question is this: what is the stuff the viewer's consciousness is traveling through that allows the viewer to see countries and secret locations on the other side of the planet? In a nutshell, the question is this: it all boils down to what is in what we call the empty space of the universe. What is in the space of the nothing? Well, to answer this question, we've opened the door to one of the greatest mysteries of our existence, a mystery that our ancestors described in the language of their time, and that modern science is just beginning to understand in ours. Almost universally, ancient texts and indigenous traditions describe a field of energy that connects all things. I want to give you some examples for how those descriptions have been created in the past so that you can see the parallels to what we now know exists today. Chief Seattle, 19th century elder of the Suquamish people, he described this mystery, and I'm going to read this specifically. He said, "All things are connected. Man did not weave the web of life. He's merely a strand in it, and whatever he does to the web, he does to himself." In the prophecies of the ancient Hopi, there are descriptions of a web or a net as well, and this comes from the Hopi prophecy of what happened after the first world of the Hopi was threatened. Spider Grandmother emerged after the destruction of the first world. She emerged into the second world, and the first thing that she did was she wove the web of creation upon which her children and her grandchildren and all things in the universe could exist. Now, I want to share with you the exact words from the Hopi prophecy describing how this happened. This is a quote: "When the universe was still so dark that not even shadows could be seen in the night, Spider Grandmother began to sing her weaving song while she danced across the sky. As she spun her thread, the sky world filled with light and life, as the stars and the suns and the planets prepared to give birth to their children." Well, you can see from this description it certainly is not scientific, but it is telling us that this universal essence, this substance, what the Hopi saw as a web, was what began the beginning of the universe as we know it today. Well, the Hopi aren't alone. In a similar way, the ancient Buddhist traditions describe how the great god Indra created the web of creation. Far away in the heavenly abode of the great god Indra, the texts say, there's a wonderful net that stretches out infinitely in all directions. And at the intersection of each point on the net is a glittering jewel of light, and that light is a universe unto itself. Well, the scientific community is beginning to describe a structure that sounds very similar to the Hopi web and to Indra's net. It's a structure that underlies our everyday reality. And even Einstein sensed that this structure was there, although as a scientist, interestingly, he shared it from a very poetic description. What Einstein said to us, he said, "Nature shows us only the tail of the lion." He says, "I do not doubt that the lion belongs to the tail, even though he cannot at once reveal himself because of his enormous size." So what Einstein was saying, from his perspective, is there's something out there. It's so big, but we cannot see it from our vantage point where we are in space and time. And this underlying thinking played a powerful role as he developed his theories of relativity and some of the other theories and mathematic concepts that led to those theories. So there's a common theme that weaves its way through each of these descriptions, through the web of Spider Grandmother, through the net of the god Indra, and through Einstein's perspective, this idea that there is something out there that connects all things. Well, in the beginning of this program, I shared Max Planck's statement, his perspective of this essence as well, and Planck's statement of this matrix that underlies our physical reality is a perfect example of what this thinking is all about. So the question is, what is this made of? What is the web or the net or the matrix made of? And what are the rules that govern this fundamental field of energy, and what does it mean to us in our lives? Well, in season 1 of Missing Links, the 5th episode, I described an experiment. It's performed in Switzerland at the University of Geneva in 1997. I'm going to summarize the experiment for you now, and I'm going to do it from a little bit different perspective, with a little bit different emphasis from what I did in that first season. The experiment itself, it was no secret. It was reported to over 3,400 journalists, educators, scientists, and engineers in more than 40 different countries. And the experiment simply goes like this. Scientists took a photon, a particle of light. This is the stuff that atoms are made of. They took a single photon. They wanted to create 2 identical photons, so they took the one and broke it into 2 separate photons so that each one would have identical properties. And those 2 photons, they isolated into a chamber, and from this chamber they used fiber optic cables moving in opposite directions, and one cable went 7 miles to a town 7 miles away. The other cable went 7 miles to another town 7 miles away. From the place where these photons began, each of the photons was shot 7 miles in opposite directions. So when they reached their targets, they were 14 miles apart. And this is where the experiments actually began. Because what the scientists found was whatever they did to one of the photons in one location, in one moment in time, the other photon acted like it was having exactly the same experience at exactly the same moment in time. They used atomic clocks to tell them how long it took, how much time did it take for the information to move from one photon to the other. And this is where the problems began, because the atomic clock said the time was 0. There was no lag time. It was instantaneous. This breaks the rules of Einstein's theory of relativity. Relativity says that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. For the 2 photons to have exactly the same experience at exactly the same time with no lag time means that somehow the information had to move from point A to point B instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. This is where the problems began. So the behavior of the photons is a problem for conventional physics. Those protons are defying the laws of conventional physics. However, they conform to the laws of relativity. And this is where the experiment becomes very relevant to everything that we're talking about when we talk about this matrix of energy. What the experiment tells us is that particles that are once joined physically remain linked energetically even though they are physically separated from one another. 2 photons were once a single photon. Even though they were split into 2 separate photons, energetically, they were connected. The term is called entanglement, quantum entanglement. And what it means is that whatever is happening to one of those photons in one place, whether it's 14 miles from the other one, on the other side of the planet, or on the other side of the universe, is irrelevant. They are entangled, and they will always reflect the exact same parameters in one that are happening to the other. Let me tell you why this is so powerful, why this is so important. If we think about the model of creation, if we think about our universe, scientists tell us that the universe began with a tremendous release, a primal release of energy that we call the Big Bang. In the Big Bang, energy was released and it began to expand, and physical matter began to expand and move away from the point of the release of the energy. If we could reverse the Big Bang, if we could take that physical matter and bring it all back to the point where it all began, what scientists tell us is at that moment, just after the release of energy, all the matter in the universe, as big as the universe appears, all that matter would fit into the space about the size of a single green pea. That all of the physical matter from all of the bodies, all of the planets, all of the stars, all of that physical matter, which is believed to take up only about 4% of the whole universe. Scientists tell us 96% of the matter is missing. 96% of our universe they believe is empty. So that 4% would be compacted into a single sphere about the size of a green pea, a really hot single sphere. They tell us about 18 billion million degrees. And when I talk to the scientists about that, I said, now how do you really know that? And they say, well, we don't. They say, but we know that it was really hot. So when all of that matter was compressed into that single green pea, here's the key. Everything was connected. Everything was connected. And even though the force of that primal release has allowed the universe to expand, and it's expanding today, and the physical matter is no longer physical connected, the experiment that we saw with the twin photons suggests that all physical matter is still connected, that we are still connected to one another. We're connected to our planet. We're connected to other stars and other planets. And this is the power of understanding what the matrix is all about. The key is that the matrix is not a byproduct that happened after the Big Bang. Now, let me say this again. The matrix that we're talking about, it's not something that happened after the primal release. The matrix is the release. The Big Bang is the matrix. It's emerging as itself into itself. Now, the implications of what I'm saying to you and what these experiments are showing are mind-boggling. We're going to explore them throughout this series. But I really want to emphasize that the field that connects all things, the web, the net, Planck's matrix, the divine matrix, this field, it is the release of energy itself. Where did the field come from? Well, it depends on who you talk to. The ancient Vedas, for example, over 7,000 years before present, they offer us a clue. It's not in science, but they describe a time before the beginning when what they call is Brahman, the unborn, in whom all existing things abide, the one manifesting as the many, the formless, putting on forms. This is the way the Rig Veda describes this primal energy that is happening as this release of energy that we call the Big Bang. So what we're finding is that the field that fills the empty space, this 96% of the universe that is believed to be missing, it's not missing at all. It is a form of energy that's been with us from the very beginning, and this is why I think this is so important. And cosmologists at the University of California in Santa Cruz agrees. What he says is that the Big Bang did not occur somewhere in space, but it occupied the whole of space. The Big Bang was space itself, bursting into a new kind of energy. And that's the end of the quote from him. So with these ideas in mind, let's go back to that twin photon experiment. What really happened? Two photons, 14 miles apart, having exactly the same experience at exactly the same period of time. How did the information get from one to the other? Well, that's a trick question, because now we know it didn't. It didn't have to get from one to the other because the information was already there. And this is the point. This is the controversy. This is the mystery. It didn't need to travel at all. It was already present. The experiment is telling us that we are still connected to people and places, no matter where in the universe, where on the planet they may be. This is why intuition works the way it works between a mother and her son, for example, in a battlefield halfway around the world. We'll see this in future episodes. This is why remote viewing works, that we just saw in this episode. This is why experiments in teleportation are working. Russell Targ, the co-founder of the Cognitive Sciences program at Stanford Research Institute, Menlo Park, California, he describes this connection in a really beautiful way. Listen to what he says. Russell Targ says, "We live in a non-local world where things physically separated from one another can nonetheless be an instantaneous communication." That's the end of the quote. Well, the Big Bang and the twin photon experiment tells us why Targ's statement is so powerful, why it's so true. In 2004, physicists from Germany and China and Austria reported the first successful experiment with teleportation of quantum information. Results are out there for everyone to see. They're reported in the very prestigious journal Nature, volume 430 in the year 2004. And what they did was they teleported the blueprint for quantum particles from one place to another, and they did it successfully. This was the first step. Huge implications now in data encryption and data security and information transfer, and ultimately the quantum transfer of stuff like you and me. So all the things that I'm talking to you about right now, all of these things, they're only possible because something exists in the nothing, because something fills the space of the universe. So as excited as the scientists are about the twin photon experiment, about the teleportation experiment, in the excitement of reporting the strangeness of the outcomes, I sense that they may be missing the most significant part of those experiments, what those experiments are telling us. They may be missing the most shattering implications, because for all of these experiments to work, it means that they must be happening within something. We're coming back to the same question. What is the stuff that makes these experiments possible? We know it's a field, but what is it really? What is it made of? How does it work? Well, in a makeshift laboratory, hidden in the basement of a Case Western Reserve University building in Cleveland, Ohio, 100 years ago, two scientists performed the first experiment that was supposed to answer this question once and for all. I want to thank you for joining me today. Be sure to tune in for our next all-new episode of The Divine Matrix, Bridging Time, Space, Miracles, and Belief.